Alright, so I've got a Porta-Cable 7539 router. This is a variable speed router, 3¼ horsepower, and it spent most of its life upside down in a router table, kind of spinning raised panel bits, and it's been making some gnarly noises lately. So I'm pretty sure the bearings are shot, probably the bottom bearing, which sits just down here underneath this plate. So replacement bearings, and I'm going to replace the top and bottom bearing. I also have a pair of replacement brushes. I don't know if the brushes need to be replaced. I'll go ahead and use those, but I do have by. Here's a rough breakdown of what the router parts look like. Hope this isn't too hard to see, but generally the armature here, the top bearing sits right on top here. The bottom bearing is on the top bearing being all the way up here. So there's generally going to have to take the tap off, separate the two halves, and then we'll dig in and see what it looks like. So the bearing parts that I have, one of them is 330003-75, and the other one is 146555-01. Those are the two parts that I got, and we'll see how it goes. Alright, so the other thing I've done on this is, I don't know if this will be a factor, but I just put a piece of blue tape on the top and the bottom so I don't misalign them when they go back together. I'm sure it'll be fine. To separate the two halves, there are 4 screws on top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 screws on the bottom side down here. If you can see these, 1, 2, 3 over here behind the plunge handle, and 4 is over here. So I'm going to take those off and see if I'm able to separate. So a little bit of screwdriver work coming up here. Just a Phillips head screwdriver. Here's the trigger for the variable speed, and inside here you can see the top bearing right in there, held on by this bearing plate. I'm going to leave that on for now until I get these two separated, I believe. I'm going to take that off and see what happens. So another 2 Phillips head screws. This little piece, it looks like it's just a cover for some of the wires, so I'm just going to tape that on. There is this top bearing, I believe, is held in. It looks like this is a split, almost like a split collet, and it looks like this plug, it's a hex. It looks like that separates it and then holds the bearing in, so I'm going to try to take that out. See if I get a hex. Try a 30 seconds hex. Alright, this is a 30 seconds hex. So with this little plug off, it's just a little threaded plug right there. That plug off, bearing pullers are always helpful. Not something that I have. Alright, so that was a lot easier than I thought. So this top cup, the bearing sits inside of this, so that's the top bearing. So what I'll do is I'll tap that out through. So anyhow, once you get that top off, you can see inside here, we talked about the brushes. These springs right here, I don't know if you can see those, but there are 2 springs, and those are used to hold the brushes against the armature. I'm going to try to turn this around. This might be a little bit easier. So here is the that covers the brush. The brush sits in that slot. The metal you see there, that is the brush holder, and then there's this paper that isolates the brush holder from the rest of the metal, so a little bit of an insulator in there. So this spring is what holds the brush against the armature. So Phillips head, take these 4. handles, I'll have to take these two screws out here, these screws out here, and that should allow the handles to separate from the bottom. That looks like it's a, I can't quite see it, looks like it's a star, but it's also a small flat-headed screwdriver. Yep, can fit in there. Alright, let's see what kind of treasure. There's some wiring inside this one, so I'm going to take the handle completely off. Alright, let's see what's under here. Okay, yep. So this handle comes off. So here's what we have inside the trigger. Looks like a ground screw down here, and this also holds that on. So go back to my Phillips head, take these three off. Alright, so that separates there. I got the same on this side, so I'm going to have to take this handle cover completely off as well. Back to the Phillips head. Once I get this done, there's a decent chance I'll be able to separate the halves, but I don't know if they're, I'll have to pound them apart or what. We'll see. Alright. Alright, so back to these three screws. This is again on the bottom. These three surround the collet. Okay, so this plate just comes off. Nice and easy. Alright, here's the bottom bearing. You can see the reddish seal here. That sounds a little unhappy. I'm going to try to pry this apart a little bit and see where I get, and if it doesn't look like it's moving, I'm going to take those screws out. Alright, the bottom's handles are free. Oh, comes out. That snapping you just heard, I'm pretty certain that was the two brushes just snapping in now that the armature's gone. So I'm going to slide this up. Alright, if you can see inside here, there we go. See those two black things sticking in from the side? Those are the two brushes right here. And they are, God, it's hard to do. They are spring-loaded. So those are being held in. So when I put the armature back in, I could have taken those brushes out completely, but if I insert it back in, I'll have to manually spread those apart to get the armature between them. So I'm going to set this top aside. And then here's the armature. You can see on the top winding here, not the winding, but you can see this is where the brush rubs against this black band right here. And there looks like there's still a lot of life left on those brushes, so I'm not going to replace those, but that's the bottom bearing. It's pretty chunky. I'm going to get an impact wrench and try to take this bottom part off, the collet, and you want to be pretty careful with the armature up here, so I'm just going to put a glove on my hand and hold this tight, and I should be able to hold it while the impact wrench does the work. So give me a second, let me see if I can find my gear. Alright, so I'm going to hold the armature with my hand, and I'm just going to put the impact wrench back here, give it a throttle. That was way too easy. That was way too easy. That was outstanding. I love that. Alright, so with that off, now you can have a nice view of the bearing. I'm going to try to pop the bearing. out, get a wood mallet. So I'm gonna just pop this and see how this feels. I can feel it moving. That's good. 3 taps. Bearing is loose. And tap that back in. There we go. So what I did is I tapped on the bottom here, and that released the entire armature. So here we go. See if I can just pop this out. That was pretty easy. So here's the bottom bearing, and this thing feels just gnarly there. So we'll pop that up and take a look at it later. All right, to reassemble. This all looks clean and clear. Take my new bearings. Okay, so I've got a 21 millimeter impact socket. And you can see how it's about the same diameter as that inside race on there. So that's on there good. Now I just have to reverse the process, and now I'm friction on this one, so I want to get a something. So I'm hanging this off the side because now I need to set this bearing into that cup right here. So I'm going to hang it off the side because the armature sticks out the bottom, as you can see, and that sits wide enough. So let's see if I can tap this in. Alright, so the bearing, as you can see now, is recessed in here pretty nicely. It feels like it's sitting nice and tight, like it's seated well. And when I was banging against this outer race, because that's the friction fit against the bottom housing on this. So that looks pretty good. So time to put it back together. Here's the collet I took off earlier. Here's the one that's just going to thread back on here, and that should capture that. So see how this works. Put this on here. Nice. I like impact wrench, man. I got this on sale. One of the best things I ever bought. It's a big one, but I use that for the suspension in the car. And by holding this in the glove with my other hand, it prevented any damage to the armature, anything getting scratched up. Some people will clamp it in a wood clamp. I just prefer to hold it in my hand, and the impact wrench pretty much did all the work. Top bearing. So here's the package for the top bearing. Get rid of that glove. Alright, so on the bottom, Reassembly. Phillips head, bottom bearing cover, 3 screws. Okay, bottom be good. Flipping it over to the top. Now, to get the top bearing out of its holder, same thing. I don't care about this. I don't have a bearing puller. I could use one if I did, but I'm just going to get a small socket, put it right in there, and I'm just going to tap this out. Alright, so able to tap that one out. There's a lot of grit on this one as well, but so as for the new one now, this is aluminum. There's a lot of crud on the inside of this, so I'm just going to get some paper and just give that a light scuff sand there. Looks better. Sits in there pretty nice. So, see this new one? That old one had a bunch of goop in there, just a crud, and the aluminum was kind of oxidized. This one is press. I can push this in with my fingers, which is good. So that's a good. So reassembly. This is going to go backwards of what we did before. See the brushes sticking out there? I'm going to have to move those aside. I've got my blue mark and my blue mark, so I know it goes on this way. I'm going to slide this down. As I get close, moving the brushes out. These look like they made up pretty well. Alright, now I've got to do my electrical connections inside the handle. So this gets flopped up like that. Trigger cover. Fits, looks good. And since I did that, I'll do the other handle. So the other handle gets these two screws that secure the handle. Good, yes, good. Alright, bottom is done. Collet, bracket is on. Handles are on. Moving up to the top. Top bearing, so it goes on like this, and then that just goes down nice and easy. So I'm just going to give this a little tap anyway. That's nice. And with this plate back in, the last thing you really want to do is just make sure that this bearing is fully seated down, that it hasn't risen up. And that's good. So it's fully down. Then the plug goes back in. Oops. Okay, I just used a wrench on the collet so I could push it here, because you can see as you rotate it, the whole axle spins down here. So that's nice and snug. That comes off. Now, if I were going to replace the brushes, here's what I would need to do. I would take that screw out, and this whole brush holder assembly would come out. The brush, you can see in see if I can do this better. Alright, so the brush sits inside there. This is an insulative cover. So the brush sits inside there, and what we're looking at is we're looking at the back of the brush. Okay, that wire coming out, that copper conductor wire coming out, is coming out of that brush hole. So we would simply take this screw out, this screw out, this whole brush assembly will come out along with the paper insulator, and then we can put the new brush in. We would have to do this screw as well. That's where the brush conductor attaches to, and then put the paper back in, put the brush holder back in. This just gets folded over and it protects it. And that's it. And this helical spring is what presses the brush against the armature. It just compresses the brush against the armature. So these look good. The brushes did look good. Give this a hand spin. Sounds pretty good. No issues. So now, put the top back together. That little finger there catches where the trigger is set to. You can kind of see the notch just on the inside in there. You might be able to right in there. So this gets set right on there, and then that allows the speed to go. So again, that's just sitting, catches, oops, goes in. You can hear it changing speed. So that's that. Variable speed lines up. That looks good. So now I'm going to put my 4 screws in the top. 4 screws. Flip it over. And now I've got the 4 screws to go in down here on both sides. This router, it's got to be 20 years old. It's got to be close. It's got to be 20 years old. So bearings lasted that long. That's pretty impressive. The fact that the brushes have. This has spent, like I said, most of its time upside down in a router table, spinning a 3.5-inch raised panel bit, or a couple of different types of them. And I have run a lot. It's also just held regular 1/2-inch shanks a lot of times, but I milled all the trim for my house myself. Pretty much every room in the house has raised panel wainscoting. You hear how grungy that sounds. And where's my 1/2-inch collet? Here's my 1/2-inch collet. That should be it. I see no parts left. I see nothing left off. Let's see how it sounds. Moment of truth. Just make sure anything with a trigger lock, I just always make sure, especially after working on it, that I didn't accidentally lock the trigger on. Here we go. That sounds a heck of a lot better. Now let's check out this bottom bearing here. I don't know if these can be picked out or not, but well, they can be picked out. So here's the inside of it. Those feel, yeah, there's some scoring in here, so it's seen better days. Worked well though, worked well. Like I said, lasted 20 years, and no complaints. Alright, well anyhow, that's how to change the top and bottom bearings in a Porta-Cable router. This is the big one, the 70, again, this is the Porta-Cable, the 7539, if I can get that in there. It's a 3.25 horsepower plunge. Most other versions will probably be somewhat similar. There might be a few variations to it, but old bearings, new bearings, and like I said, the brushes, if I needed to change them, would have only taken a few minutes, not hard whatsoever. So anyhow, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.